Man, I think one of the possibly most dangerous things that exist in the world, at least today, is carbon offset credit markets. I think that the carbon offset credit market is probably one of the most dangerous things that exists today and probably ever. But it's one of those things that's also very, very, very important. It seems so. What is it? This is what happened during the 80s when there were all of those subsidies that were given to the gas and oil sector for them to be making transitions and to be investing in technologies related to renewable energies. And when the timeline came for those subsidies to expire, did you ever read the report? Did you ever read what happened in Congress and committee during the time frame when those energy subsidies expired in the 1980s? I don't know. Maybe you can't get the books anymore. If you're like in Dallas and they just strategically took a whole bunch of books off the shelf, and you're like, wow, there are a lot of empty spaces on these shelves that didn't used to be there. I don't know if they did that. See, I read this in another city. Those books, it's a different collection in a different city, right? But I read them in 2016, summer 2016, between June and August of 2016. There were a series of books specifically regarding policy related to the Department of Energy. And, those books, 1981 through about 1987, I'm telling you, there's some interesting stuff to read in there, right? And then when you're in the library, you get to cross reference with other reference materials. It's pretty exciting, especially if you got access to the microfiche. And then you get into the treaties in force. But at the time, they didn't have treaties in force. They had the actual index, the treaty index. And you're like, whoa, what's this mean? And then you get in there and you flip through the card catalog and you take out some of the microfiche and you go to the microfiche reader, put it in there, go through, scan through, and you're like, oh my God, what the heck? Really? Actually, that sounds pretty cool, right? Whoa, wait a second. Hey, what's the actual underlying commodity basis for this deal, right? I mean, it was pretty exciting. Maybe that's not around anymore, right? Because the stuff they had like that in Dallas, that's not around anymore. You can't do that. They took the microfiche out. They took about out a lot of those collections. And I had some notes. I took some notes. I wrote them down. I had all this research, man. I came to Texas with. Somebody got that. How's that purple bag going? I've been having this problem with this purple bag. Because I bought that purple bag from a co-op. I had a membership at a co-op, and I bought that purple bag. But the record of me getting that purple bag as a replacement for the other one, which I bought at the co-op, which means I have one of those special memberships, which means if you lose the bag, right? Well, you've got this relationship where you can get a replacement. But something happened, and the records of my membership in the co-op, man, they got lost, right? So it's like I can't contact the co-op and be like, yeah, I need a replacement bag. Because then it's kind of like, does the co-op know somehow? Is somebody in their co-op involved with who stole my bag with all the stuff in it, right? Which includes stuff like that, information like that. But I bring this up because now we're in this situation, and I started doing this research at one point in time about windmills. Why? Because I went somewhere, and when I went there, they had a windmill farm on their land. And it was something else, man. You ever been around a windmill farm? You know what it's like? Do you know what it sounds like? Do you know what the ground around a windmill farm sounds like? You know what it feels like? If you haven't had that experience, man, I'm telling you, it's something else. And then there's all the decisions about where it's going to be placed, who's going to get access to it, what's the rate, all these things. I didn't know enough about that at the time. I wanted to learn more. So I've been doing this research on and off, specifically about windmills, but also wind energy in a context of other kinds of energy. And I found something out. At one point in time, I found out that there's a country my mother told me her people came from. And I was sad at one point in time because I learned that 30% of the economy of that country was devoted to manufacture and export of pharmaceuticals. That the number one commodity basis for export was pharmaceutical products and biomed products. And that made me very sad. But then I also learned in a different source that wind energy and creation and construction of windmills was also something that was very highly sought after to be affected with this country. And I started looking at the actual means by which this sort of thing happens. And it was a very, very interesting process when it comes to construction of windmill blades. And part of it, some techniques, involve the need to have access to a certain kind of fiber fabric. Now, this fiber fabric has a particular kind of capacity and ductility, even though it's not metal, right? And that the process whereby the construction of the actual blades in some techniques involves these overlays, these layers of fiber fabric with another base, and then it ends up creating the actual structure of the blade. And I was like, wow, what where would you get this fiber fabric? What does this fiber fabric look like? Because I thought I saw something that looked like that one day at a fabric store, and I start looking it up, and I'm looking for something else at another time, and I find some, so I start cross-referencing it, and I'm like, wait a second, why is it? Does this country have a very specific and profound relationship with the production and manufacture of fiber fabric? Is it the kind of fiber fabric you could use for the construction of windmill blades? Okay, why is it sanctioned? Why is it sanctioned like this? Wait a second, what are the dates on these notices? Oh my goodness, 5 years after the date on this notice? Oh my gosh, 10 years after the date on this notice? Oh my gosh, over and over and over and over again. And then you start cross-referencing. Wait a second, you're talking about fiber fabric from this country, but then you're talking about steel reinforcement from another. See, it would have been different if I hadn't met those guys that worked on the bridge who were talking about the rebar. And I'm like, whoa. Right? So, these are the kinds of things that now I'm very, very interested in. Because what does any of that have to do with the carbon offset credit market? We'll see. I started asking questions like this in a variety of ways, especially in 2016. It was like, these are the kinds of things we really need to be looking into, especially if we're talking about specific kinds of investment, including investment that would require, I don't know, some sort of international cooperation. And if we're talking about international cooperation and, the fact that we've got this sort of situation going on energetically with the energy paradigm in the United States, if other countries are in a situation where they're making some sort of investments moving forward, don't you think we need to know? And in the course of needing to know, wouldn't it be important to see if these concerns that are being raised by people we say we're allies with in another country might actually have some merit in our own investigation of our own self-interest? I mean, it would have been different if I hadn't just gotten into the year 2016 after publishing more than 3 articles specific to water policy and the relationship of water policy to hydroelectric energy, and whether or not hydroelectric energy even actually qualifies as a renewable energy source. And insofar as it does, then how does that factor into considerations of alternative energy sources like, I don't know, nuclear energy, right? Because nobody wants me to deal with windmills anymore. They really, really don't. Right? But I'm really interested in getting to know more about these things, right? We should be able to have an understanding and an expansiveness and an awareness of what all that means. Does that make you suspicious? Do you already got your energy source and supplier hooked up? What about the distribution? Did they give you some time on the grid? Right? Did they make you a worker in their system, and now you're worried about compensation as opposed to rates? And so it's different. If you're talking about rates regarding transmission or, production and the cost to the consumer, it's a lot different than talking about compensation, right? Especially if you're a veteran. And I understand that. But that's no reason to be suspicious and assume that somebody contacting you is automatically doing it in a bad faith effort. So, are you going to ban me from the mailing list again? Are you going to ban me from the mailing list, and are you going to make sure to let everybody in your network that, alleges that they're licensed to practice law, are you going to let them know that you have a pre-existing claim to a lease you put on my minerals, and so they're not allowed to provide me with anything within the bounds of the law? They're not going to be allowed to provide me with any legal counsel. They're not going to be allowed to provide me with anything that would take my evidence and enter it into a chain of evidence, including in connection with specific reports or specific cases that are already pending, including ones that are in the media, including ones that may not be in the media, but I know about because I've been doing my own investigation. Are you going to say that because you've got your own timeshare on my mineral bed, because somehow it was allowed to use me as a mineral bed, as opposed to all the other things I could have done, that you have what? An exclusive right of access because of your pre-existing claim? Well, see, here's the thing. And this is what I just want you to know, right? We have a really great opportunity before us right now because those claims expired on July 12th. July 12th of 2021. I didn't know. Nobody told me. You know, if you had told me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that you had an option for a timeshare on my minerals, and that having that option on a timeshare for my minerals might help you and your people get access to resources that you otherwise wouldn't have had, and you would have them in a means and in a manner that may preclude the need to try to make a kind of moral judgment about whether or not to engage in activities that were identified as clandestine or covert, or in some ways potentially illegal or illicit. And so you were making that transition into what everybody always wants, which was to be, legit. You'll see, the problem is now the time's up. And now you don't get that carbon offset credit because I didn't turn into carbon. Right? Because that's my concern. You really, really, really banked a 15-year deal on getting the credit for offsetting my carbon. And I'm not carbon. Is this where we are in our energy transition? Okay. By the way, I never agreed to any of that. It was not only attempted for solicitation under false pretenses, but it was an effort to try to extort me specifically and personally into agreeing to cooperate with not only an extortion scheme, but an extortion scheme that was laundering money for very, very, very highly illegal activities. And the problem is, I do not believe, honestly, that you can collapse me into any other class that ex post facto decided they had seen what had come before them, but now they had more leverage. And so if you can keep me quiet, maybe they can exercise their claim. See, that happened with HUD. That happened with HHS. Right? And it kept happening year after year after year. And I am not going to let you cover up for or cut some deal so that Rex and Rick get off the hook for what they just did. Because that too was a 15-year deal. And I believe that they had a timeshare option they didn't disclose. Can we just get this straight?